All right, good evening and welcome to the sixth gathering of the Westborough Master Plan Advisory Committee on Thursday, October 8th, 2020. And we will do the open meeting formalities here while we have a few people continue to join us. So pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Master Plan Advisory Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and all parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Westborough's website at town.westborough.ma.us. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so in the following manner. Members of the public wishing to participate from their remote location are encouraged to email their questions to planning@town.westborough.ma.us. Emails need to include your full name and address in the subject line in order to be read as part of the record. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. The meeting can be viewed on Verizon Channel 24 and Charter Channel 191 or live streamed online at westboroughtv.org. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the Town of Westborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. So that's done. Thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Great to get together again. A quick run through tonight's meeting. Really going to focus on subcommittee report backs. So thank you so much to all of you who met last Friday's deadline and got templates back into us. We look forward to hearing tonight from the Transportation Subcommittee, Public Health, Natural and Cultural and Historic, Housing Subcommittee, Open Space, and the Sustainability and Climate Change Committee. We then have a guest speaker. Selectman Ellen Edinburgh is here to talk about the Affordable Housing Trust, which I think is a very important component of the master plan and will cut across most of the subcommittees. So we look forward to hearing from him. We have him on the agenda, on this agenda at 7:05, but given the number of report outs we have, we expect that might be pushed to about 7:30. So we don't expect Alan before 7:20. We'll have questions from the committee for Alan at that point, and then we will adjourn. So before we start tonight, as you know, I tend to ruminate on things, and my reflection this week is that it was the 2003 master plan that envisioned the possibility of the establishment of transit-oriented village in an area of town close to the railway or within walking distance of the train station, and that in exchange for a density bonus, a developer might provide a sending parcel of open space to the community. And that was an idea that was put forth in the 2003 master plan that was eventually taken up by the community, enacted by the community, and the result, the benefit was the sending parcel was Veterans Freedom Park, which provides, an extraordinary recreation resource right in the heart of our town. And I was thinking about that as we gathered last week for a special town meeting in which approximately 212 residents in the middle of a pandemic showed up to act on 3 articles, primarily motivated by the article that was voted unanimously to preserve another 60-odd acres of open space right in the heart of town, the acquisition of the Lee property off Eli Whitney Street. And so congratulations, Westborough. Extraordinary that not only did we have such a fantastic turnout, but that was the outcome. And if there's been one consistent theme in the public feedback during this master plan process, it's been to ensure that we continue to balance development with the preservation of open space. not only does it create another magnificent parcel on which to provide passive recreation, but it preserves that green space for cleaning the air, and it keeps it out of development. Keeping it out of development for single-family housing reduces the pressure on the school system, and it keeps everything in balance. So I'm incredibly grateful to everybody, particularly the Board of Selectmen who negotiated the deal, but also everybody involved from the open space side of things for achieving that. So while we engage in our work of thinking about the town 20 years out, 15 to 20 years out, the town continues to engage and do the work that was envisioned in the 2003 master plan. So thank you for being a part of that process and for continuing to do such great work. So I will turn over the facilitation of this. Has Jim Robbins joined us?
Yes.
Hi, Jim. Welcome.
Hi.
So I will let you take over, Jim, and facilitate the feedback from the subcommittees. And if anybody has something that they'd like to add or comment, let's make yourself known, and we'll do it that way.
Thank you, Lester. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, you're fine, Jim.
Okay, thank you. As you know, one of the first tasks that each subcommittee has had in the first phase of our master plan was to create a feedback template based on the meetings that you've had in your subcommittee and based on the baseline report produced by our consultants, VHB. Each committee had a template and had a small task, which was to identify the opportunities and how you would address those opportunities. And right now, Kristen is sharing the feedback template that you have in front, that all of us received at one time or another. This is actually the Transportation Subcommittee template. And what I'd like to do is to ask each of the subcommittees to talk about their issues and opportunities, and that there be a representative from each of those. I know that Kristen had an agenda where there was a designee. I know that also that there are several groups that have not provided a template yet because they haven't been able to meet. Thank you, Kristen. So Kristen is showing the list of subcommittees that submitted their template and who will speak for their subcommittee. I ask that you keep it short, 10 minutes, no more than 10 minutes, so that we can get through as many as we have, and we have time at the end for the Affordable Housing Trust. So the first one that we have is the Transportation Subcommittee, and Chris Payette, I guess you delegated yourself or someone else made you the volunteer. So Chris, if you want to share with us your thoughts, Kristen will bring up the Transportation Subcommittee template. Thank you.
All right, good evening, everybody. Group of people together, put together what you see on the screen here, some thoughts that we've had based on a whole lot of experience that people in the group have had in Westborough. So I don't think you'll see anything surprising on here, but eventually I think we could probably consolidate some of the issues listed on the left side of the screen. But I think we all agreed that it was important to highlight, at least for tonight's discussion, some things individually, and then down the road we can consolidate and reorganize. But going through the issues, we won't go through every single one individually, but more in terms of their application. So if you read them 1 through 5, those really deal with congestion and access to the downtown, essentially. And so access in terms of getting, from our perspective at least, getting business, access to businesses and bringing people in. So the example in number 1 is the Route 9, 135 interchange there, where it's pretty dysfunctional and potentially discourages people from getting off Route 9 and coming downtown. And then the congestion piece, I think we're all familiar with, and there's probably a number of reasons, and some of them are listed here in numbers 1 through 5, but I think that's pretty straightforward. Number 6 MBTA parking, obviously not a issue right now and probably not for the last 6 months, but we know historically it has been. We know there's some efforts in the works to improve that, but that's we thought worth highlighting. Number 7, traffic safety. So if you might be aware that the town is in the middle of its integration into the Complete Streets program, which is a Mass DOT program. And that's helped us identify a lot of issues revolving around pedestrian and bike mobility in town. The residents have had a lot of opportunity to provide feedback, and many of them are associated with traffic safety or pedestrian safety primarily, and that's what that captures. Number 8 really gets to the process. So we can identify a bunch of things that need to be addressed, but clearly defining how we would do that is key. And I think we're on the path to doing that right now, and that'll be developed over time. But it has been potentially an issue where we've had just different parts of the town focused on different things, and maybe some duplication of effort or lack of connectivity between groups. Number 9 really deals with kind of the administrative side. There's some things we can do policy-wise, potentially down the road that could influence the direction we want to go. If we want to get more towards bike and pedestrian access, potentially supporting electric vehicles, there might be some policy type things that we need to address and correct or add to. And then number 10 is something we always struggle with. And there's an example there of VIA. It's not necessarily a sling at VIA, particularly. It's just an example of something that's new to the town, and how do we engage with the public and let them know these things exist. Example is VIA, or other efforts like the BWALT, which is something that the town has been pursuing for quite some time, a trail. How do we better engage the public? So not sharpshooting, but just it's always a question. How do we better engage? And then you flip to the right side of the screen. That's talking about opportunities. So number 1 is key, because potentially that's going to access funding for us, and the town's pursuing complete streets, safe routes to schools. We have access to the Transportation Improvement Program and potentially mass trails. So there's some opportunities, and we really see those as ways to access funding, but also expertise and guidance, and people that can help us navigate the efforts we want to pursue. Number 2 is something that the group discussed, really taking a hard look at the key corridors in town. So if you look at the Rotary and you go South Street, East Main Street, West Main Street, Milk Street, pretty key avenues for the town. How can we look at those, from a point A to a point B and all things in between, and address issues that are either vehicle or pedestrian or bike, what have you, and capture that all in one document, so we have laid out in front of us, a roadmap for how we would potentially address issues on those corridors. And thankfully, we're potentially going to have a template of that created as we look at Otis Street, because we're working with the town's working with the developer there to conduct a corridor study on Otis Street, and we're hoping we could use that as a model for how we would do future studies if it proves to be a successful method. And then opportunities for partnership and leveraging some of the development that might happen in Westborough. That's 3 and 4. So those are always opportunities we want to look out for. And having a corridor study could potentially give us a roadmap or a menu of choices that we could look to find opportunities to partner with businesses, because we have a document that says, hey, here's the 16 things we need to do to make this what we want. And then we could cherry pick those things and work collaboratively with people around the town. Number 6 is kind of an out of the box one, but that was referenced in the previous master plan, and we discussed it. It's the possibilities of it are, who knows, but it was brought up quite a while back, and there's potentially some pros and cons to that, but the group thought it was worth mentioning as an option to at least consider, even if it's, pretty far out of the box, but it's still something we talked about and we know it was considered in the past. And then the last two are ongoing activities. So the VIA shuttle service is just kicked off, and we're hoping to see some good things from that. And then we know there's a parking study that's hopefully going to get finished up soon that will give us some feedback on how we want to address parking downtown and what adjustments we might want to make. So that's the quick summary of what we looked at. Again, I don't think there's anything that anybody here has probably not seen before, but we've tried to capture it all in one document and then take it from there. So subject to questions or any comments from other members of the subcommittee that want to chime in.
Should the entire master plan make comments or just the subcommittee?
Oh, I think if you have a comment, Peter, we'd love to hear it.
Sure. So clearly in the next decade in the life of this master plan, there's a massive transition to electrification in the transportation segment. And I think in the opportunity side, there should be some highlights of state programs that are going to assist that, including subsidies for electric vehicle charging stations in larger buildings, like all of the municipal buildings, commercial and industrial build out should all be require electric vehicle charging, multi-tenant buildings, so forth. So I think there should be more emphasis on the opportunity side for preparing for electrification of transportation.
So thank you for that. Kristen, I wonder if you just keep the transportation document, keep each document on the screen current while we have a little bit of discussion on each. I think that'll be helpful. Does anybody else have a comment for the Transportation Subcommittee? Chris, I wanted to thank you for the work, and I think it's really important to have a lot of ideas like number 6 that are out of the box, that seem today perhaps unattainable or possibly even impractical if they are visionary, right? It's not the intention of this process, and this comment is made for the reflection of all the subcommittees, that it is from this process that we want to think big, and we want to think beyond evaluating any of these ideas now at this stage of the process for their feasibility. Right? These are to some extent, they're very practical. They're being done. We're doing them in parallel, but we do want to think about the hard things, and it's not going to be actually the charge of the Master Plan Advisory Committee to vet those ideas or to express an opinion on those ideas. If they are believed to have merit or something to dream for, then the town in the next 10 years after adoption of the master plan will figure out whether or not they're feasible. So I think it's great work. Thank you. Anything else for the Transportation Subcommittee? Okay, I don't see any other hands raised. To raise your hand, again, if you scroll to the bottom of your screen, you get to see the participants icon. So it's a participants, 2 little people and 23. If you click on that, you'll see a list of names, and the feature appears there. I don't know how to lower. Oh, there, lower my hand. Okay, should we move then on to, I believe public health is up next. Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Lester, and good evening, everyone. So, our group met, and quite honestly, public health can involve so many different things. It was really tough to try to narrow down, and maybe in the end we might have narrowed too much. But I'll go over the issues. Some of them are very specific. Some of them are more, have different parts to them. And obviously, I think Jody is on, and I think Kathy might be on too. So if they want to input anytime, that would be great too. So just going over the issue part, the the first thing we identified was, active living, walkability in the downtown and throughout Westborough as being an issue. This kind of overlaps, of course, what Chris just talked about with the Complete Streets grants, but I think it has a public health portion to it also. The next issue we identified was, and this has a lot of different parts to it, and this number 2 could probably go. We could spitball plenty of different items that could be put in here, but we're talking about community health issues such as prevention program around mental health, substance abuse, obesity, vaccination. You can just keep going and going and going. We don't have a whole lot of that right now in town. And when you think about that, the Board of Health right now is set up for kind of environmental health, but there probably comes a point when we should kind of look into doing more community health, and we are just not set up for that right now. So that number 2, we could really expand on that, quite a bit, but in the interest of time, we'll just throw those few things out right now. Number 3 is fairly specific, Lake Chauncey. So we've been having problems with algae blooms there in the past few years. That's obviously a public health problem as far as, people can get sick, animals can get sick if they go in the lake when there's problems with that. But it also is a problem with, it's a recreation body in town, which is, is something that the town should be proud of, and we want to try to find a way to make sure we can utilize that to the utmost capacity that it's there. And then the 4th one, this one we had a little tough time with, but 25% of Westeros population is over 65, and this gets back to the community health part or offering different services. Right now, from the Board of Health perspective, we don't do a lot of targeted programs for them. So it's something we tossed around a little bit as a group. Now going to the opportunity side, of course, making better walking trails, biking, to enhance an active lifestyle. Complete Streets, as Chris mentioned before, that's an opportunity to look into for that. There was a recent staffing study done by the town which recommended a public health nurse be hired, whether that is a full-time position or will be a part-time shared with another town. We're still kind of working on that. But if we were able to do that, we obviously could have more programming, and utilize that person to do more outreach and community health endeavors. Also, part of that, we should start looking at things such as zoning, and to kind of protect different health factors, not only zoning, but regulations too. And I'll give you an idea of this. So, we have tobacco regulations. Part of those regulations, we could, in fact, limit the number of permits we provide, cap them at a certain number. And when places go out of business, not have those available. Things like that would limit, the amount of, the amount of, how much tobacco would be available for kids, that sort of thing. So there was discussion about either that type of regulation or maybe using zoning as a tool to do that type of thing. The lake, obviously we need to have a comprehensive study of the lake as far as, what's going on there, where are the point sources of the nutrients that are in there, what can be done in the future. That's something that I think we're working on right now with the rec department and also with conservation, maybe to have a company do a comprehensive study in the near future to identify what the sources are and what we could do in the future to make sure we don't hit those blooms. And then as far as also with, talking about the aging population, if we were able to get a public health nurse, we could certainly try to have that person target, a different type of programs for that group in town. So it's kind of a very quick summary. I don't know if Jody and or Kathy have anything they want to throw in.
Sure, I can tune it. Can you hear me?
Can hear, yes.
Okay, I don't know if you can see me or hear me. I'm having a little trouble with my computer tonight. Yes, Steve, thanks for pulling that together for us just in the last couple of days. Our section on public health was sort of the first draft of baseline conditions. Our consultants took all of that we were thinking of and trying to get our hands around and wrote out a section already. So this is maybe adding some more specificity to it. But that section already addresses active living and walkability, community health, and things like nutrition, access to healthcare, access to healthy food, illness and disease and prevention issues. So we were looking at all those issues, or trying to get our hands around those in the baseline study as well. Environmental exposures, Steve already mentioned those, that we focused a bit in on Lake Chauncey, which is a community asset, which can serve health promotion, but also we don't want anybody getting sick out there, so we need to protect it as a natural resource too. And then the section also mentions community cohesion and mental health, and that's sort of, we have a human services group as well. So this is one of those topics that cross sort of over some of the groups that we're setting up. And that's about social integration and engagement, and substance abuse and mental health and social services. So this area that we're putting into a master plan master planning is traditionally about the built environment. And when you get into public health and the human services, we're about how the community lives on the land. So this was, again, we're working to get our hands around it and find specific things we can put into the master plan. But then going and looking at bylaws and regulations, Steve mentioned the tobacco regulation as a tool that's available for both health promotion and disease prevention. And I know we could look at that again. Buffer zones are a possibility. I know when smoke shops opened up in Westborough, but they're not allowed to open up in neighboring communities. I heard a lot of feedback, at least from the parent community, about why Westborough is accommodating that when our neighbor communities are not. So those are things when we're looking at how we live in the community, as we plan for the future. These are some of the tools available to us to prevent sickness and disease. We've got biobehavioral hospitals in our community, and we have, through recent history, there is a commitment to treatment and becoming well, but these prevention-oriented policies are something I'd really like to see us focus on moving forward over the next decade.
Great. Kathy, did you want to add anything, or have they covered it?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you fine.
Oh, amazing. Yes, I got a little bit behind in terms of what I should be doing, but I've been working on some aspects of this over the last week or so. And I think that people are in some cases kind of critical of the senior center, that it doesn't do enough for seniors. And I actually don't agree with that. I think the senior center does a terrific job in many ways serving seniors in terms of transportation to medical appointments and all sorts of things like that, which I can enumerate. But I think we maybe want to look at this a little bit differently and say, well, okay, so what else could we do? What else could we add on to this? Seniors, we all disagree. There's some disagreement about when do you start being a senior. So, we have seniors that say start at 60 or so, and then we have people, who are in their 90s and still active, and they don't have the same needs. So I think we've got to work on not getting rid of what we have, but enhancing what we have and maybe building on something more.
Wonderful, thank you. And it's been a while since I read the original baseline draft, and I do think that pandemic preparedness is in there and mentioned, but it would certainly, given our current experience, we should be sure that, public health preparedness for a crisis should be a part of this chapter.
Yes, that's a really interesting point. Sorry.
Jim, did you have a comment?
Yep. Sorry to interrupt, Kathy. Yeah, one of the thoughts that came to me, maybe under the opportunities area here, Lester, with the consideration of a recreation center. I think the idea of I worry that a lot of seniors get isolated, and so there's a few different opportunities. One that attracts me is to bring young and old together, and recreation center on the lake, or potentially a relocation or some combination with a senior center, so that people of different ages are brought together in a location like that. Focus on like the enhancement of the new, hopefully, library and then just the whole idea of continuing to create a downtown where people come together. So I think, so there's activity, but there's also engagement. And I think it's good for the young people to be with the seniors. It's good for the seniors to be with the young people. So, continuing to find locations and opportunities for the community gathering. I just think that's good for everybody's public health. So that concept may be added in some way. That was it.
Great, thank you for that comment. Okay, great, very nice. I will take this opportunity to point out that on westboroughmasterplan.com, we are under the documents library. We are posting these draft documents. So any and all of you can review them. Any of you can submit your ideas by email to the planning department, and we invite the public as well to look at these documents. And as we develop the baseline condition chapters, we'll do the same. So we're looking for your input. Thank you to the Public Health Subcommittee, and I think we're moving on to Natural, Cultural, and Historic. Gary, are you with us?
Yes. Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you. Thanks, Gary.
Well, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So our subcommittee did have a great deal of difficulty in meeting. And in fact, what I submitted was just a natural component of our subcommittee. I believe Jen is planning to submit the historical component shortly, but I'm not aware that that's happened yet. And we are woefully behind on the cultural component, which I will make a comment about at the end, because one of our subcommittee members basically had to withdraw, and we're kind of scrambling at this point to fill that. With regards to natural component issues, we have declining biodiversity in our town. It's been declining for some time. There are a number of reasons for that. There are limited policies and procedures for managing town open space. In fact, there are very few of those that exist or could be reviewed. We have limited stewardship plans for town open space. That is to say, actually, that there may be one or two of these. They're well hidden. I don't think anybody knows about them. And there are certainly numerous open space parcels that don't have any stewardship plan associated with them to speak of. There are unclear plans for managing growth within the resource capacities that we have, such as the water supply. And so it's basically a note that should be reviewed and probably made more visible. We don't really have coordinated pest control policies for people to refer to. You can think of this in terms of, if you will, in many cases, environmental or public health versus the environmental impact of what it is that we might do. Hunting of deer has been an issue in town. Deer browse in town does have an impact on our environment. We hear about coyotes in town and people are concerned about them. Mosquito spraying, tick spraying, invasive species control. These are all things that we could probably do a better job of coordinating best practices and communicating that, or making those things available should people be interested in them. Lake Chauncey has come up. There are issues associated with Lake Chauncey, which have already been identified by the public health folks and the recreation people as well. And you should be aware that there is actually underway the beginnings of a management study for Lake Chauncey that will help inform us about how to best to manage that resource going forward. And Hakamako comes up. It's basically a parcel that is sort of sitting there. It was a site that was tainted with creosote and has been cleaned up, at least to the best of the ability of the folks that did that. And it comes up periodically as an opportunity to do things, but we really should have some kind of a use plan for it going forward. So under opportunities, we should be developing policies and procedures to support biodiversity in open spaces. A lot of these have been converted basically to grass fields, which do not have a lot of ecological value. And some of those perhaps should be reverted to more natural areas that could better support things like insects, pollinators, and things like birds that feed on the seeds and the insects that those spaces could be providing. We should be developing stewardship plans for the town open spaces, and should probably be putting in place, probably within the Conservation Department, goals for doing that over a period of time. Develop the Town Conservation Commission website to contain outreach materials for the public, including descriptions of open spaces, not limited to town open spaces, trail maps, not limited to those on town open spaces, and various best practices for property management. This could also be a place, in addition to the public health portion of the website, where we posted best practices for pest control, for example. This is something that other towns have done. There is a need for it in our town, since people can't find these resources when they go and look. And it's been fairly successful in other towns in addressing that need. Review the town's plans for pest control and hunting, and probably coordinate with various departments that also are stakeholders with regards to those particular issues. And study the town's plans for access to water resources. Water is a limited resource, and under drought conditions, this becomes apparent, but as the town population grows and its industrial base grows, we will continue to strain these resources over time. Comments?
Great, Gary. Thanks. Jim Robbins.
Thank you, Gary. I think that's a very good identification of the issues and opportunities. A lot of these points, particularly those about managing growth within resource capacities, water supply, directly relate to our subcommittee that I'm part of, which is climate change and sustainability. And as you know, Gary, the town is involved in the Municipal Vulnerability Program, the MVP program. I know you participated in the workshop. And I think that that's certainly something that you could probably add onto your opportunities, because particularly the strain on the water supply, storm management, erosion control, the effects on Lake Chauncey and Hockomock as well are things that were mentioned in the Municipal Vulnerability Program plan that we're putting together. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for sharing interests and pooling resources and overlap between the Climate Change Sustainability Committee and the Municipal Vulnerability Group. So thank you. I think that's really good. And also I would like to add to Gary's call for a stewardship plan for town open spaces, because as most of you know, when a subdivision comes along, whenever it's an open space community, there's land gifted to the town or created, sent to the land trust. And it would be good if we had an organized plan, as Gary points out, to let people know where these spaces are, but how they should be maintained. And specifically, he pointed out invasive species as a negative, but also providing wildlife corridors for our declining biodiversity and species that are under attack, as it may be, even because of global warming or because of sustainability issues that are created by loss of open space. So I think there's a lot of opportunities here. Thank you, Gary. I think it's a good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Before I released the floor, I said I would say a couple of things about cultural. This already came up, I think it was James Ball that made this comment, and I had sent a note to Lester because we're so far behind on the cultural component. That's something that I hope that the town will include in the master plan is something to consider going forward, is to integrate with the concept of a recreation center, which has been proposed on the state hospital property, the idea of an arts cultural center in addition, a place that would bring together people of all ages, young and old. There's a need for meeting spaces available to the public, small meeting spaces, as well as larger ones for talks and presentations in the town. Also, a stage where concerts and plays could be put on, and maybe we could sponsor some groups in town that were interested in music and theater arts. There would be spaces even in the recreation center for the visual arts. You know, the town used to be on the coffee circuit, which was, you know, for folks that are old enough, they might remember the Vienna Coffee House. And it was a place where, again, folks of all ages could get together, typically towards the weekend. And our town wasn't the only place that had places like this. A number of the towns around had these. And we were able to bring in basically musicians and other acts from the surrounding region in a little circuit. Westborough being at the intersection of major highways, this would be not only something that would be a benefit to the people that live in the town, but would also be an attraction to our local region and might encourage people to want to settle in our town as it enhances basically the cultural aspect. So it's another component that we could add to our open space, our schools. You know, it would be a cultural component as well. So James had brought that up, and I also think that that would be something that the town ought to consider pursuing as they flesh out plans for the use of that property.
Great, Gary. Thanks very much. And I know those sentiments have been broadly expressed in the feedback we've had from the community. It sounds to me, actually, despite your apologies for the progress in that respect, that you have just in those comments several opportunities that could be put into a cultural template as a very good start. And I also know from emails received today that you reached out in some fashion to other stakeholders for this subcommittee that include the Cultural Council, the Arts and Common Planning Committee, Luann Crosby and Christopher Noonan, who in their proposal for a downtown planning overlay district include a lot of reference to cultural opportunities. So I think we have, I think also Anthony Weber, the town archivist and historian, the library, the fine arts department at the schools in general. These are all organizations that could be listed as stakeholders and you know, to develop opportunities from those. So to the extent that you can carry on with that, please do, and get the feedback in. If you need help to bolster your committee, maybe there are others who might wish to volunteer to help you on that, or we'll certainly find a way to help you out.
Thank you, Lester.
All right, I don't see any other hands raised to comment on natural and cultural resources. So we'll move on to the Housing Subcommittee. John, are you with us?
Here.
Great, floor is yours.
So we lost a member of our committee early on, but I don't think that slowed us down. We were able to meet several times, both in person and virtually. And I think we came up with some pretty good issues and opportunities. So we did throw things at the wall, and this is what stuck. So There's a lot of overlap. I don't think that's ours. There's a lot of overlap because housing is kind of a very general term, obviously. And I think one of the biggest focuses in the Commonwealth right now is affordable housing, both capital A and lowercase a affordable housing. So we've talked about that. So the first issue, I have the thing open in my screen, so I'll just go off of it now. So the first issue is affordable housing, and that's capital A and lowercase a, capital A being deed restricted, lowercase a being just generally affordable housing for people. So that's an issue. Housing prices have gone up significantly in the last few years. Additionally, available property for development is an issue. And this is kind of paired with one of our opportunities where we're looking at preservation of open space and development at the same time. So we want to preserve the open spaces that we still have while still encouraging development of housing that is affordable to people. So doing that in a responsible way is something that we need to look at. Existing housing available for rehab for affordable or senior housing, there's not much there. And what is there is there's not that much resources available to work that type of housing into what we need. But there is an opportunity that we have listed that does address that. So I'll get to that later. Lack of tax incentives for housing development for live and work. And then there's also a limited tax incentives to allow seniors to stay in town. So tax incentives for housing is something that we talked about, not in specifics, but in general. And there's probably some work that we can do with other committees that might involve that type of stuff. Maintaining existing multifamily housing. There is multifamily housing all through town, and keeping that as it is, whether it's apartments or whether it's 2 families or 3 families, stuff like that, is important to maintain the fabric and the character of Westborough. So we're looking into trying to maintain that. Need for multifamily housing, accessory apartments, and cottages. So you've got a whole mix of types of housing around town. You see downtown, you've got a even greater mix. And then once you get out into the less developed areas, you've got more of just the single family, large lot housing. So encouraging the mix of housing is important. So we'll look into that. And then incongruent zoning related to existing housing with an example of downtown. So downtown is zoned residential, which is large lot, and a lot of the lots downtown are very small and they are non-conforming, so that's fine, but that doesn't allow for more of that type of housing to be built downtown. So you'd have to build larger lot housing next to houses that are on maybe 1/4 of an acre or less. So changing the zoning, and this is one of the opportunities, changing the zoning to match what's there and keep that same type of development in those types of areas is something we'd want to look at. And then uninhabitable properties and underused properties. So there are some around town that we need to work on and look at. So now back to the opportunities. And like I said, a lot of overlap between the issues and the opportunities. So if I repeat myself, that's probably why. The first opportunity is the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. And what Alan will talk about later is something that's going to be before the town at town meeting. And we think that's a great opportunity for the town to build and maintain affordable housing. Community Preservation Act adoption is something that we are obviously looking at as a town with the investigatory committee. And so something like that would provide funding for affordable housing in town. Downtown Village Overlay District would provide different types of housing in the downtown area. And that's something that we would look at in terms of just maintaining the fabric of downtown and increasing affordable housing for all types of people, whether it's seniors or young families or singles or anything like that. Zoning changes to promote affordable housing and live-work housing. There's not too many opportunities for this. So looking at that and seeing where it could go and where it would be appropriate is something that should be done. Protection of open space conservation. That's something that I talked about earlier. Looking at how to balance the development of open areas that still exist with preservation of open space, and whether that's open space preservation type subdivisions where you're having clusters of houses and then preserving the rest of the open space under a CR or donating it to something else. That's something that the town may need to look at. And then we talked about tax incentives, and that was just the opposite of the lack of tax incentives or the limited tax incentives, is increasing those and encouraging the types of development through incentives that the town might be looking for. Changing zoning for multifamily housing, accessory apartments, and cottages. Again, I already talked about that because there's a lot of overlap, but increasing the types of housing that's already here and it fits in with the housing that's existing. Downtown specifically, you've got a lot of cottages, a lot of smaller footprint houses and smaller lots, and encouraging that type of development so that's traditional New England downtown, and you're not forced to put 1 acre house or 1 acre lot in an area that it wouldn't be around neighbors that are similar. And then the 9th is Attorney General Program for Rehab, and there's this program that the town has been looking into and working on, and some of my subcommittee members might be able to talk about this better than I can, but it's to use funding to keep people in their houses that may be close to being condemned, or they just need a lot of work. And this is using a special program to help improve that, even to just just at the code level, not making anything fancy, but just keep it so that it's up to code, that they can live in it. And we've talked about potentially using that program at the local level to also say, well, we'll provide some funding at the local level if this house then gets deed restricted as affordable. Therefore, you're increasing the affordable units in town on the SHI, but you're allowing these people to stay in their houses and improving the housing as you're going. And then the final one is creative ideas for housing development. One of the things that we talked about here is the Steinmart is vacant, and you've got BSC that's having financial trouble. So if that goes out of business, what is that building going to be used for? Bay State Commons has had a vacancy issue. So could that building be reused as apartment housing or multifamily housing? We understand that the multifamily housing on Bay State Commons has already got a wait list. So clearly there's a demand for that type of housing. So could we reuse some of those potentially vacant future for multifamily housing?
Great, John. Thank you very much. And thank you to your committee for the good work there. Lots of great ideas. Kara, did you have anything you wanted to add to what John reported out? Kara, you're on mute. Or Hazel? Also on mute.
All right, I can speak a bit to the Attorney General program that John mentioned. It's actually something that Steve Bakari could speak to much more knowledgeably than I, because it is kind of headquartered out of the Public Health Department. But there are, when some housing has been deemed unsafe to live in according to public health violations, there are some of these houses that the owners may be given an opportunity to bring the houses up to code. And if they aren't able to do so, they there's a whole process with the Attorney General's office where the Attorney General's office can take the house into receivership and improve and bring the house up to code. And we are wondering if, and I don't even know if this is a realistic possibility, but wondering if there might be an opportunity then to help the owners if they're financially unable to bring the house up to code in order to make it habitable again, if there might be a role from some financial support for those owners at some point in that process. So just wondering how we might be able to build on that program that we've already started using.
Yeah. So Kara, this is Steve.
Oh yeah, sorry. Steve, please.
Yeah, so I didn't know how to raise my hand. So yeah, you did a pretty good job summarizing. So the Board of Health we are participating in the Attorney General's program with abandoned housing, and we were going pretty good, and then the pandemic hit, and unfortunately, the Board of Health is like the lead agency with this stuff, and so there were 1 or 2 houses we were pursuing, and I just got to tell you, it's just kind of been on the back burner since for the last 8 months. Something that hopefully, as at least things slow down in my office a little bit, maybe, we could probably pursue again. But again, I think the main pinch point in this is that I am the person that kind of runs that and just haven't had the time. We are straight here with stuff. So,
and
this
so
is
Steve,
a 20, it's a 20-year master plan,
yeah,
Steve.
thank you,
no
Kara.
worry.
Thank you for beating me to it, Kara. Yeah, please. Well, we're in the reflect stage, right? This is aspirational at this point. We're wondering about what we can do, and what we might propose as part of this is to ensure that not everything falls to you, Steve, or the right, or your department, right?
Yep.
So there's no apologies needed here. This is aspirational. Kara?
I might add to that too, that we didn't mention this as an explicit issue, but implied in what the conversation we're just having is that there is some housing in town that is unsafe for habitation. And we have a small task force in town, including Steve and I and others, who are doing little things to address the unsafe housing. So that might be an issue we throw into the mix with both public health and housing.
No, I think that should be explicit on the issues side. I know you've got uninhabitable
so
there, but unsafe would be great to add to that. So thank you very much. Jim Robbins, your hand is raised.
Could I just, I didn't raise my hand.
Oh, Hazel. Well, we'll go to you first, Hazel, and then Jim.
Okay.
We'll go to Jim next.
All right. John, I didn't hear you really talk about the Community Preservation Act.
He did mention it.
Did he?
As being under consideration, and a study group has been formed.
Yeah, maybe he could give a little more information on that, or Jim Robbins could.
Sure. So the Community Preservation Act is a program at the state level where there's a tax that's levied on residents, and it's voted on by town meeting as to what level you want to put it up to. I think the maximum is 3%. And that goes into a pot that is used for different types of projects. And there's requirements as to how much goes to each type of project. So the four categories, if I get this right, is affordable housing, open space, historic, and I forget the fourth. But that money there's a match. And at the beginning of the program, a couple of years ago, the state was almost matching at a higher level. But now that a lot of communities have joined the program, the state funding is at a lower level. So you're not getting a one-to-one match, but you're still getting funding from the state to use for these types of projects. And so how this relates to the housing is that there's going to be a pot of money that has to be used for affordable housing, and then another portion of money that can be used for affordable housing. And it's pretty wide open as to how it can be used, whether it's acquisition of property or rehabilitation of property, or rent assistance, that type of thing. There's a lot of opportunity there to use that funding for affordable housing, as well as the other types of projects that you can use it for, whether it's open space or historic preservation, that type of thing.
Thanks for that summary, John. I think the consideration of the CPA, the Community Preservation Act, cuts through a lot of the departments, and we'll be hearing a lot more about that in the explore stage and the commit stage. So thanks. Jim Robbins, your hand is still raised, so if you unmute, you've got the floor.
Thank you. John and the rest of your group, I think this is a great effort. Some very creative ideas. I'm glad that you brought the Community Preservation Act again to the table. We've tried, as some of you know, twice to get it passed and have failed. However, I think the attitude and the awareness of the community may be such that this time it will succeed. It was in the 2003 master plan. One point that John made that I want to clarify, you mentioned up to 3% tax on real estate, and it's a 1 to 3% tax, and it's at the time of sale of property. It's not something that would go on your tax bill. So that's a key point in trying to sell it. Secondly, there is a fourth item that the funds are available for, and it's recreation and cultural programs. So I think that's two things that we've already talked about. I think those are things that we need to champion in the master plan. One other comment is thank you for bringing up the vacant properties in the downtown. That has been a discussion in town for years. Many departments have talked about it. We talk about it at department head meetings. that particularly around the Rotary, we're all aware of some of the buildings that don't have uses above the first floor. That would be great for housing. And as we saw when 25 East Main Street was developed, the units went quick. You also mentioned Bay State. The units there for sale took a while to get off the ground, but once they started to sell, they all sold out quickly. And I like the creative idea of possibly repurposing the Steinmart building and the sports club building, should that become vacant. I think that would be an excellent location. We've seen that people like to live at Bay State Commons. Affordable housing there, at least a portion of it as affordable housing would be great, because we really do have a need for affordable housing, particularly for Westborough residents. So those are my comments. Thank you to the group.
Thank you, Jim. And Kara's hand is raised. Kara, we'll get one more comment from you before we move on.
Yeah, sorry about that. I just realized in the conversation about the safe housing, I wanted to also make explicit what may be implied, which is under affordable housing as an issue, that also one of the problems caused by unaffordable housing, the issues is overcrowded housing. I know we talk about that again around safety, unsafe housing. I just wanted to make explicit there's a lot of housing. Our first responders talk a lot about how they encounter a lot of families that are double and tripled up in single units. So I just wanted to be explicit about that and recognize that we should probably add that to the list.
Yeah, let's make that explicit in the issues side. Thank you, Kara. All right, thanks. Great discussion, good work. We're going to move on now to open space and recreation. And, you know, at the meeting one of the Master Plan Advisory Committee, Jen Kirkland promised us fun. So no pressure, Jen, but let's have some fun.
Do my best. Hi. Let me just see, we lost that. Let me find the list. So our committee is made up of myself, Mark Silverberg, and Josh Lee Smith. And I think Mark is on the call, so I'll go through this, but I will definitely let Mark, if he wants to, touch base on the open space stuff, because he is a lot more experienced and knowledgeable than I am on those items. But so just the issues, a lack of a community center, that's already been discussed a couple of times here tonight. When reaching out to different users in town, it was an overall theme that there's just no indoor space for recreational purposes, you know, for young and old. So it's definitely a need in town. I'm hopeful we can maybe start to make some progress on. The Hockomock Pond was touched on also, but that space, as I understand, is just kind of sitting there waiting to be developed or used. So we felt like that's sort of some wasted space that we could move on to develop. Complete the charm bracelet and move forward with the multi-use trail. Those two, I think, kind of tie into the need that people expressed for, you know, more you know, places to walk or bike, things like that. Fund the open space fund so that when there are projects or parcels available, there'll be a way to help fund them. Expand open outdoor facilities such as lit fields, turf fields, or outdoor basketball courts. This came up when I reached out to you know, Little League, youth basketball, youth soccer, lacrosse. That was a resounding need for indoor space, but the second most requested was some lit turf fields that they could use. You know, even if it was rainy that day, they could still get out there at night on a turf field. Execute and design the construction of a dog park. This is already somewhat underway in our department. We've looked into the Stanton grant, which will fund 90% of the cost of the dog park. So we're in the process of moving forward with that. Again, outdoor and indoor recreation areas for seniors. I reached out to the crew that plays pickleball on Lyman Street, and they were really responsive. They love the outdoor courts, but again, they're worried about the winter and just having a place where they can go be active inside. Like there's some examples there: shuffleboard, indoor walking. Preserving open space to limit development, and building and maintaining relationships with landowners to obtain easements. So heard that, you know, the trail, and I don't know if this is true with the charm bracelet as well, but just there's some easements that are needed to complete some of these projects. So then I'll move over to opportunities. Improve the trail system and passive rec on existing conservation. So we just purchased the Belknap Street property in Eli Whitney, and there's other parcels in town that we have that we want to maintain and develop into, usable trails and whatnot. Maintenance and upgrades of existing facilities. So the fields and courts that we have, we want to continue to maintain them and keep them in good condition so that they're usable for the long term. Develop and upkeep of the state hospital property. So we have that beautiful property up there, and we do a good job, we meaning Earl and the DPW department does a great job of keeping it with the upkeep of it. And we hope that that will be the place for a community center that serves all ages. The open space and recreation plan was recently updated, and we want to continue to keep up with that and update it. I believe it's every 5 years or 7 years. So this kind of goes with funding the open space fund, pursue land grants, adopt the Community Preservation Act and other ways, and kind of brainstorm other ways to fund the open space fund. We have Veterans Freedom Park, which is a beautiful piece of land for passive recreation. We want to keep an eye on adjacent parcels to expand that that park for more passive recreation. Review the actual open space provided and explore ways in which open space regulations can be modified. So this was something when developers come in to maybe look at the regulations, it was discussed that maybe our regulations are a little bit on the strict side, and it maybe looking at ways to reduce those regulations to accommodate developers and promote economic development. And last is land management plans on existing open space. So like we were talking about Lake Chauncey, to get a watershed study done there, the trails, wetlands, et cetera, kind of work with conservation on that. So that's kind of the overall. I don't know, Mark, if you wanted to talk at all.
Mark?
Okay, so I don't have a lot to add. I mean, I think Jen summarized it pretty well. I just wanted to kind of run through that we did a lot of reach out on this. We reached out to Sudbury Valley trustees and Westborough Community Land Trust, as well as most of the recreational sports leagues. And, I mean, Jen probably can summarize. She did a lot of the reach out for the recreational stuff, and I did a lot of the reach out on the open space side. And a lot of the feedback that we got from the organizations echoed the feedback that we got at the public through the public process. And I think we tried to summarize it without, having 25 issues and 25 opportunities. So I think we narrowed it down as best we could, and I think hopefully the committee will agree that this, that this incorporates a lot of ideas, and you can take one idea and expand it, and bullet point it to death. But hopefully we get the importance of open space and recreation to this town, and get that message into the master plan.
Great, thank you very much. Looks like great work done, and thank you for reaching out to other stakeholders and stakeholders beyond our borders. I think at the beginning of this process, we gave voice to the intention to include regionalization or regional interests in this master plan process, and it looks to me like yours is one of the first that have really done that. They've gone out, watersheds extend beyond our borders. The opportunity to extend trails beyond our borders is all part of harmonizing regional interests with those of Westborough as well. And a note to VHB in this process is to ensure that that is given explicit voice, either in this particular chapter or throughout the other chapters. Thanks very much to both of you. I don't see any other hands raised in Zoom, but does anybody else have any comments? I'm not sure how to recognize you. You could shout out if you like. All right, hearing none. Let's move on then to the Sustainability and Climate Change group, and Peter Dunbeck and Jim Robbins are going to give us their latest updates. Peter?
Sure, I can get it started and invite and ask Jim to keep me honest and adjust and add to what I've said. The information that's here is a result of some meetings we had in the spring. Since then, we've separate from this process, we've run the Climate Action Plan Task Force, which has adjusted and kind of matured my thinking somewhat. So some of that thinking has not been fully reflected here. So I'll try to weave it into my comments. The first bullet, fundamental issue is that the current operations of our homes and businesses and so forth are creating too much greenhouse gas, and our actions are impacting our local resources as well as the climate more broadly. Kind of number 2 and 4, I think, are kind of the same issue, that we have older building stock, whether it's residential or commercial and industrial, that's often inefficient. And I think there's opportunity to improve the efficiency of our building stock, and through that increased energy efficiency, lower our emissions and lower our impact on the climate. The opportunities in public transportation in transportation changes are significant. I mentioned earlier the electrification. I think there's an opportunity there, which I guess I should stick to the issues. One of the challenges is we live in a distributed suburban area where the houses are separated quite distant, and public transportation is not readily adaptable for the community we live in. Doesn't mean there's nothing we can do, and in our recommendations, we're encouraging some further investment in public transportation, but it's not the cornerstone of what we're recommending. One kind of issue that I would put that's not here is that this is a very highly dynamic environment at the state level, and it is very likely that in the next years, state regulations, state programs, opportunities are going to be coming out at a steady pace, and it's going to be difficult for each community and for Westborough to respond to those. And so I think that's an issue, and obviously there's opportunities associated with that. The bullet on reducing development impact, I think could be rephrased maybe a little bit to say that current development isn't aligned with kind of sustainability and climate goals of certainly the state, and as Westborough is adopting the state goals, our current development mode is not aligned to those goals. So we should be looking at how we change that, whether it's building codes or zoning. And so then going down the opportunities side, we do have 2 organizations, Sustainable Westborough, which is kind of a steady state we've been running for several years, and they've brought in grant money for the municipal operations to improve our energy efficiency and our climate impact. The Climate Action Plan Task Force I alluded to has been very active, and we have a draft document that we're beginning our community outreach on. And I would like to share that with this group, and I'll do that offline through Lester and the leadership team on how to best do that. I did want to say there's this like timing a difference where the master plan is looking at a 20-year horizon and aspirate these broad aspirational goals. The climate action plan is intended to be much more tactical and much more action oriented, with more of like a 2 to 4 year life of the document itself, with goals that we need to see changes in the next decade in order to make the changes to protect the climate. And so it's got a different kind of tone to it, I would say. But it doesn't, so I'm encouraging that the master plan endorses the need for a climate action plan, but recognizes that there's a difference in the way it's structured.
Yeah.
The above groups are engaged in plans. So I think I've kind of addressed that one. Public transportation, access, education. I think some of the stuff with VIA, I think, is an innovative idea. Could potentially provide connectivity between local businesses and the commuter rail. Could provide some intra Westborough connectivity with public transportation. I'd like to see that system electrified over time. It's you know, as we all live in a very kind of complex world, it's hard to keep everyone informed, local residents and businesses, about the opportunities. There's state programs to subsidize and to encourage the changes. The state has very aggressive goals and are funding programs to achieve those goals. I think there's opportunity for Westborough to take advantage of those programs, show leadership in this space, as well as to get the economic advantage of these state programs. The incentives are highest to seed the market, which is now, and those incentives will go away over time as the markets develop of their own. So I'd encourage kind of a close alignment and awareness of the state programs. I did mention kind of in the issues side, I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of change in regard to state law, in regard to zoning and building codes that encourage high efficiency building. Net zero building code is almost assured over the next few years. Probably optional for a few years and then become mandatory over time. These are things we need to be prepared for and introduce them into Westborough in an organized way. So I haven't spoken exactly to the bullets, but I'll leave it to ask Jim to fill in anything that I've missed in regard to sustainability and climate.
Thank you, Peter. And I want to just mention that, you know, Peter is a locally recognized expert in climate change and the effect of renewable energy on the community. And I think we're very fortunate, my subcommittee is very fortunate to have him, and the Master Plan Advisory Committee as a whole. It's very fortunate to have somebody that has such passion for these issues. So thank you, Peter. I'm just going to talk about items 4 and 5 on the list of issues and opportunities. These were thoughts that I have and that Peter had brought up to me once before, particularly number 4, about residential and commercial property energy consumption should be addressed to achieve positive change while creating savings to the owners. So when I first came to this town, if you talked about the stretch code for building materials, or you talked about renewable energy and solar farms and other forms of renewable energy, there wasn't a lot of interest. As a matter of fact, there was opposition because of the expense. But I think people's mindsets have changed now. You see more residential owners putting solar panels on their roofs or even arrays in their backyard. And you've seen a lot more of solar farms. As a matter of fact, we have 5 solar farms in town now. Developers have learned that it's a good way for them to make money, and it's also a good use of the land because it allows the surface of the land to remain permeable, and that's a good thing, as opposed to having a large impermeable footprint. There are a lot of programs currently out there at the state and the federal level to incent building owners, particularly during new construction, to pay for energy efficient buildings. We've all heard of gold and silver and platinum levels for energy conservation. We have a couple of those buildings in town. Those types of things are to be encouraged. Number 5, reducing development impact to ground surface warming and water consumption. So the thought here is that as development increases, we not only lose our tree cover and our vegetated cover, but because we develop impervious surfaces, we raise the ground temperature, which ultimately raises the air temperature, which causes warming, which is one of our major concerns in this subcommittee, and water consumption. Because we have increased development, we have some companies, and we're very proud of our biotech companies, but they use a lot of water. So we need to create a program to incent and help developers and companies create low impact development techniques. And we have a zoning district in town called Industrial D, where we lower the standards for permit review in exchange for the developers using low impact development techniques, more green space, infiltration of groundwater, planting of more trees and landscaping that require minimal water use to promote water conservation. Most of you have been to the Department of Public Works and you know at their entrance, they actually have a xenoscape garden there. So that Russian sage and rhododendrons and a few of the other, there's a yucca plant there. Those are a demonstration of xenoscaping that can be employed in our regulations that need almost no water, almost zero water. And in a time like this summer when we had drought conditions, those plants thrive. So we need to be more aware of the types of things that we can do that are minimal costs actually during construction and during landscaping. Those are my comments, and please for questions.
Great, thank you both very much. You know, this is a seminal theme in the master plan, and one of the the overarching issues we have to address. And just to put, Peter, your comment in place about the community action, the climate action plan being more tactical than maybe the overall length of the master plan. You know, remember, the intention is to have developed and adopt this master plan by May of 2021. So there are certainly numerous opportunities for accomplishments and achievements in that 2 to 4 year time frame that you're talking about for the climate action plan. So by no means do I think that they are different or different documents. We're in that stage of the master plan that we are thinking aspirationally, but the ultimate goal, if the goal in 10 years is to be carbon neutral or whatever goal you want to write that's aspirational, we're going to have to achieve some tactical successes very early to make that possible. So I think that they're very much in sync, and they should very much cross-pollinate one another. Fantastic work. Thank you, everybody. We are substantially moving along in our subcommittee responsibilities. My subcommittee is economic development, and just an update on that. In order to develop our issues and opportunities template, the intention was by now to have had public outreach meetings to our large business employers and developers, and a separate outreach meeting to the smaller businesses in town. And obviously, COVID-19 has put a delay on that, but we did meet this week with VHB and with our consultant on economic development, and we hope by the first week of November to actually have convened 2 online roundtables to gather input from those in our business communities from which to develop the issues and opportunities. That said, we have Selectman Edinburgh with us. Alan, thank you for joining us tonight. And he's been spearheading and working on the Affordable Housing Trust in town, which, as we heard from John Gelsich, is an essential component of the master plan. So welcome, Alan. We'd like to give you 20 minutes to talk about the plan and what's envisioned, and allow some time for questions after that. So I'll turn it over to you. You have the floor.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me here. I'm here today not only as a member of the select board, but in my role as chair of the Affordable Housing Trust Working Group. As a little bit of background, last January, the Board of Selectmen hosted an affordable housing forum, which, if not the first, one of the few times in which all of the stakeholder organizations in Westborough at the town level were in the same room to talk about the issue of affordable housing, capital A and little a, the little a being more housing affordability in general. And this working group was an outcome of that, to look at whether or not, and if appropriate, recommend that Westborough create a municipal affordable housing trust. Last week, the working group approved our final report, which was presented on Tuesday to the Board of Selectmen. I'll forward a copy to Lester for distribution. I don't know, John, if you've had a chance to do that yet, in which is a lot of data analysis about housing trends, demographics, land use, issues around affordable housing, and coming up with a list of action items, a key element of which is the creation of a municipal housing trust. So I do a presentation I'll move through quickly here. Okay, so I can cover. So where we started from, and I hope everyone, if Lester or Pete, you can give me a heads up if you can see the presentation. Excellent. So back in 2018, with the town strategic planning effort, housing affordability and diversity was ranked as the #2 top priority. And there were specific recommendations made as far as an affordable housing fund and strategies to ensure a variety of existing buildings. And that's something that the town really needs. When we look at the data, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development defines affordable as 30% of a household's gross income towards either rent or mortgage payment and utilities. If you exceed that 30% threshold, you're cost burdened. If you exceed 50% of your gross income towards housing, you're severely cost burdened. When we look at Westborough against our data dashboard towns and surrounding communities, we're about average as far as the level of cost burden. Nonetheless, more than 42% of renters and more than 16% of homeowners are cost or severely cost burdened, meaning many residents are struggling with the cost of housing as a percentage of their family household income. And so this is where a municipal affordable housing trust can step in, because it provides the structure, funding, management of projects that improve housing affordability. We set it up by accepting Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 55C as a bylaw of the town, which creates a public entity. As a public entity, it operates like any other government entity with respect to procurement, selection, open meeting, and conflict of interest laws. And the trust fundamentally operates as a real estate trust to create, maintain, and preserve affordable housing. So we look at how these trusts run. The leadership is a board of trustees, a minimum of 5 members. One must be a member of the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen makes the appointments of trustees at 2-year alternating terms. And the administration of the trust, when it comes to the funds, are generally done by the existing town finance staff. The treasurer collector holds the funds. The finance director manages things like receipts and payables, disbursements, and there's an annual independent audit required by law. Some trusts are large enough and active enough to hire staff. Most will rely on town staff, and you're able to reimburse the town for the use of any town staff used by the trust. We can also contract with experts. While not required under Mass General Law, we are proposing a level of oversight for the trust by the Board of Selectmen. I'll get into that in just a few moments. Trust activities come in 4 flavors: acquisition, creation, preservation, and support. And you can sort of see the definitions there. Really, by using a mix of these activities, the trust can address a wide range of housing needs. And so if we look at it from a slightly different angle, affordable housing trusts have the ability to buy, sell, lease, manage, build, and fund housing projects. They can also support local initiatives that meet both subsidized and workforce housing needs. When most people think of affordable housing, they're thinking about subsidized housing that goes into our SHI against 40B. Well, there's a broader range of affordability that the trusts can work with to meet a broader range of needs of residents and the community overall. What do some of these projects look like? Here's a slide with 5 samples. Some affordable housing trusts will buy market rate units, modernize, bring them up to code, make necessary repairs, put in the affordable rider, and sell them as affordable, and effectively cover the difference between the market rate purchase and the affordable rate sell. In Yarmouth, the trust granted money in partnership with a nonprofit developer, spent a little over $2 million. The developer paid the rest and took a former out-of-business hotel and turned it into 69 apartments. Trusts often reuse surplus municipal buildings. They may get involved in new development, and they can certainly, in many cases, have purchased existing developments, converting a percentage of them to affordable units. When we look at our data dashboard community, we can see that most of these communities have affordable housing trusts or similar entities. There are a few that have something similar that was created prior to the law that allows for municipal housing trust. So they're structured slightly different. And the percentage numbers in that chart represent most recent data from DHCD as far as SHI's inventories of 2017. Quite often, trusts are created as a way to mitigate the risk when your subsidized housing inventory is below 10% and you're doing a housing production plan. Given that Westborough is above that 10% threshold and has always been active, it's more of a leading indicator where a housing trust can help protect that 40B compliance as well as address a broader range of needs. So we're not doing this out of crisis or in a defensive posture. We're trying to be proactive to keep our housing mix and our affordability healthy. So why now for Westborough Affordable Housing Trust? We want to achieve the goals in the strategic plan. In doing so, creates a broad range of benefits to the community, not just with respect to housing, but a healthy and affordable housing environment, supports job creation and retention, benefits tax revenues, improves sustainability, and reduces inequality. We're also fortunate enough right now to have zoning and mitigation funds available from active developments that can help fund the trust in its activity. So we've defined our mission along with the guidance from Mass General Law, which is to provide for the creation and preservation of affordable housing units in Westborough for the benefit of low and moderate income households, and to support efforts to improve housing affordability for our community in general. And what does that look like? If you look at a family of 4 right now, depending on the affordable housing program, the area median income, which is sort of the benchmark of qualification, ranges from about 98,000 to about 111,000. Affordable housing that's part of our subsidized housing inventory is typically geared at people whose household incomes are 30% to 80% of that area median income, or AMI. Workforce affordable housing tends to range from 60% up to about 130%. So when we look at the broader needs of the community, we're talking with a family of 4 with a household income of 30,000 all the way up potentially as high as 145. And so it can really help with a wide range of needs in the community. Where does the trust's money come from? Most trusts are funded pardon? Oh, sorry, I thought there was a question. Funds.
If you're not speaking, could you just mute your microphones, please? We've got a few open mics with a little bit of background there. Thanks.
Okay. So most funding of trusts and the funding of this trust will happen at town meeting, where money will be appropriated or transferred from a number of available sources. In June, at annual town meeting, there are 2 stabilization funds related, one specific to the Del Webb Chauncey Lake Stabilization Fund and that project, another for mitigation funds in general. Should Westborough adopt the Community Preservation Act, there's an affordable housing component of that, and the regulations around what a housing trust can do have been updated to align with how CPA funds can be used for affordable housing as well. So there's good synchronization there. And some communities make additional appropriations out of free cash or even out of the tax levy to meet certain goals. Additionally, the trust can accept gifts, bequests, or grants from private or public entities. The trust may partake in activities that generate revenue, and the trust has the option of selling assets. And there have been trusts, for example, who've received either through a town taking a property by tax taking and transferring it to the trust, and the trust deciding that it wasn't going to be effective to redevelop that property as affordable housing. The trust then sold that as market rate and used those funds for a different project. And so there's a lot of flexibility within the construct of the housing trust. I mentioned earlier about oversight. Under Mass General Law, housing trusts are fully independent government entities, with the Board of Selectmen and the town structure having the ability to appoint and remove trustees. However, the law lets a town restrict or expand the powers of the trust. So we are using that power to give the selectmen 3 points of oversight through concurrence votes. So on any single transaction that would commit 50% or more of the trust assets, that action would have to go to the Board of Selectmen, a presentation made in a vote of concurrence. Similarly, when the total transactions that the trust is undertaking reaches 80% of the trust assets, at that point, every action would go to the Board of Selectmen for concurrence. And then any time the trust wanted to dispose of real or personal property that's over 50% of trust assets, that would go to the Board of Selectmen as well. This oversight is designed to provide, these guidelines are designed to provide rules oversight by the board, but not in a way that would restrict the trust's ability to remain nimble and responsive to not only the needs, but opportunities that might arise. Additionally, under Mass General Law, there's an annual report to the Board of Selectmen as well as the town, and there's an independent annual audit of the trust's finances and fiscal health. The trust has been doing a lot of outreach. In addition to making presentations to boards and committees such as this, the trust launched a community engagement site. We've had well over 600 unique visitors to the site in the 4 weeks or so. It's about 4 weeks it's been up and running. People are following the site so they get notified of updates, and we have a high level of feedback through the feedback mechanism on that site. In listening, not only looking at the notes and listening to what happened at the Affordable Housing Forum, but that engagement site, we've set up a set of 7 guiding principles that we want the trust to operate under. And part of establishing these principles is to guide the trustees, set expectations from the town, but also let the town know how the trust will function. And so we certainly want to help maintain our SHI above the statutory requirements of Section 40B of Mass General Law. We feel we should prioritize housing needs based on community input as well as a sound data analysis. We should promote efforts that span the full range of affordable and workforce housing needs, leverage projects that help the sustainability of the trust. So for example, lending money to a nonprofit developer for parts of the project, where that money comes back to the trust for reuse later, is obviously more advantageous than grants. So that's what we mean there. We want to consider and respect the impact of projects on town services, not just schools, but public safety, DPW, library, senior center, youth and family services, the whole range of town services. We also want to respect and reflect the architecture and style of housing in our neighborhoods. And I know this has come up earlier this evening in some of the discussion. We're not looking to put 7-story buildings in, neighborhoods that have single-family homes or duplexes. We want affordable housing and workforce housing to blend in with the community and the neighborhoods within the zoning, within the guidelines that the town has established. And finally, to work cooperatively with town boards and committees and departments, because there are many stakeholders with roles to play in managing and creating affordable housing. Based on the community feedback and the data, we have 4 priorities, initial priorities for the Housing Trust, helping keep the SHI for Westborough above that threshold, expand affordable housing options for seniors aged 62 and over, increase availability and access to workforce housing. And what's interesting is if you look in our analysis and action items report, Westborough's demographics actually fit a prototype known as Millennial Valley, in where the population, particularly folks exiting college in their low and mid 20s, is significantly below the state average. And that generally means that there isn't enough housing affordable to that part of the workforce. So when we think about the biotech companies moving in and the technicians working there, when we think about the Amazon Robotics Center, and you're going to have people working in manufacturing and warehouse, and even engineers being hired outside, out of college, housing for those parts of the community. And the Massachusetts Housing Partnership actually identifies that as an issue because that demographic is a key aspect of economic development, in that it's a demographic that prefers to work, shop, use restaurants locally. They want to avoid long commutes, and they tend not to have children in the school system, and they tend not to be heavy users of public safety, which can be the two largest impacts of housing development. And so we see that as a priority for us. And finally, to preserve existing affordable units so that we don't see a decline in our subsidized housing inventory. So the next steps will be at our special fall town meeting in November. 2 warrant articles, one to vote to create the trust, and one to provide an initial amount of funding so the trust can be up and running and start operating. Following that town meeting, the Board of Selectmen will appoint the trustees, at which point the trustees can file the declaration of trust with the Registrar of Deeds, and the trust would be operational. If people are interested in learning more, there's a short link on the screen here, coerb.co/WAHT, which is our community engagement site. I want to thank the Massachusetts Housing Partnership, which is a statewide nonprofit that's extremely active in multiple aspects of affordable housing. They actually provided the funding and donated the site and paid the fees for us to get this service up and running and get the site up and running for the community. So we're greatly appreciative of them for that assistance. They've also been providing data, access to their data services, and a fair amount of technical expertise as we've moved forward with this project. I covered a lot of ground. Any questions?
Fantastic, Alan. Thanks very much for the work you've done here. And this is, again, one of those pieces of work that validates what an amazing community we have, right? That this will undoubtedly be a goal of the 2021 master plan, which is to, consider creating an affordable housing trust. And we may well have accomplished that before we even publish. So I will say that if you would, Alan, provide a copy of that presentation, maybe just a PDF, we will post that under the documents library link on the master plan site. If I could ask a favor, just to put a footer on those slides that puts a publication date on them, so we have a date reference point to that. That would be worthwhile, and people can go back and reference that presentation as well as your report. So when your report is ready for publication, we would be glad to, and I think should post it on the master plan site as well.
So, yep, the report has been published and was presented on Tuesday to the Board of Selectmen, so I'll provide that as well.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I don't see any Zoom hands raised. Is there anybody that would like to ask any questions of Alan? Jim Robbins.
Thank you, Alan. Nice presentation. A lot of work has gone into this that you've been doing behind the scenes for many months now. And I know that you convened that discussion of the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board and the ZBA to talk about this last year. And that was a lot of work. Thank you very much, Alan. I wanted to mention the Community Preservation Act and the availability of funding for affordable housing. And I'm assuming that that money could also be used to support a project that the Affordable Housing Trust might do. I had a sidebar chat with John Gelsich earlier before this presentation, and he corrected me on a comment that I made earlier. The percentage that the individual taxpayer would pay is an annual percentage. It's not on the sale of the property. So I just wanted to correct that for those of you who are thinking about the details of that program. But Alan, I assume that we could use CPA in the Affordable Housing Trust.
Yes, you can use CPA money within the Affordable Housing Trust. When the trust receives CPA money, it actually remains semi-segregated from other funds in the trust. And the operational rules for housing trusts make sure that the trust uses the money in line with the requirements of the CPA, so that the two programs, stay in sync as far as appropriate use of the funds. So there are a couple of activities that the trust can be involved with that you can't use CPA funds. Effectively, the CPA funds will be used in something that is directly involved in creating or maintaining affordable housing, where the trust may undertake activities that are a little more indirect at times, a little more long-term strategic.
I know that the town in Northborough created two affordable units in the middle of their downtown, specifically with CPA, I think almost exclusively with the CPA money. And they have other examples of how they've used CPA money. I think that they have a 501c3. That's how their trust is set up. You might reach to them and see how they're doing there and what they learned.
Yeah, we've looked at the projects and the operation of about 14 different housing trusts. Some within our data dashboard, others that DHCD and the Mass Housing Partnership have identified as best practices. And so we have a good sense of the variety of the activities that can be done.
Thank you.
Spinning off of Jim's comment, Alan, is it likely that our trust would be established as a 501c3, making it eligible for donations from donor-advised funds or giving funds?
So we're not creating it as a 501c3 because under the Mass General Law, we're creating it. The fund can receive gifts and donations and is considered a nonprofit entity.
Okay,
so it's comparable in municipal terms. My understanding is, it's comparable to making a donation directly to a school, for example. So it falls under.
And do you know whether those donations then are deductible for tax purposes if it's not a 501c3?
I believe it is, but I will double check and confirm that. Because deductibility of 501c3 donations has even changed now under the current tax code. So for businesses at least. So
okay,
I will look into that.
Very good. Anybody else? Any comments or questions?
Yes, I have a question for Alan. 25% of our population, 65 and older, can this trust be used to help seniors stay in their homes? Two things come to mind immediately. One is increasing tax burdens that might impact people. And the other is access to services for independent living and stuff. Can the trust do any of that kind of stuff in addition to the kinds of things you've outlined?
So the trust wouldn't get involved in providing funds to deliver services or access to services, but there are ways in which the trust can help people remain in their homes. Some of that, some of those programs might require that the homeowner allow an affordability rider to be placed on the property, so that when they sold it, it would become part of our affordable inventory. But the trusts can, the trust, if someone wants to stay in their home, for example, if that home is going to become affordable at some point, the trust can actually loan money that sets as a lien on the property, and it can be 0% zero payment and simply be a lien that gets paid back when the property is sold. or the trust can actually offer grants for certain types of repairs, typically around code or habitability. So anything that would threaten a certificate of occupancy, the trust can be involved with. Things like new carpeting and fresh paint, those are considered rehab. Trusts don't spend money on that. There are other programs that could provide that type of assistance. When we look at what we might do for 62 plus housing, there's a lot of creative things happening as far as conversion of other residential or commercial properties, reuse of municipal buildings, as well as there's a rising trend to supportive housing and group housing options as well that give people who want to stay in the community but might even be ready to downsize out of a single family home more options in the community. And of course, all of this goes through the zoning and the design reviewed and follows the town guidance. The Housing Partnership Committee will guide the trust and help it through the pre-permitting process on projects we undertake as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alan. Christy Williams, was there anything that you wanted to add to the discussion at this point?
I don't have anything to add except that we've certainly been working on this for a while. Selectman Edinburgh and his group. I think this was a really great kind of new process for us to take on some ideas in the community, with kicking it off with that summit type meeting and having a forum, and it's worked out really well. I think that we've heard a lot of support from the community of the Affordable Housing Trust, specifically after we started setting up those stabilization accounts at the June town meeting.
So, and one last thing, I do want to thank John Delchick for joining us. Not on our working group, he's been attending probably more meetings than some of the members of the working group. He's attended most, if not all, of the meetings. He's provided us with some great ideas. We're aware of the work that the Housing Subcommittee is doing, and we want to stay in line with that. So we're sharing all of our work, all of our data with that subcommittee as well.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, John. So that brings us to the end of this meeting, and a little bit of signposting. We're obviously, I mentioned that the economic development roundtables need to occur before we move that piece of the process forward. But it's my understanding that from the templates now provided, the feedback will go to VHB. They will incorporate that into the drafts of the baseline conditions chapters, and then those will be circulated to you all for review and comment. And the intention is by the beginning of November to move into the explore stage, so move beyond these baselines and into actually looking at policies and how we might structure the contents of the master plan. So we will continue to stay in touch with you via email, but of course you can reach out to any of us on the leadership committee. I think that this exploration of the Affordable Housing Trust, the closure on land acquisition for preservation of open space, these continue to be wonderful examples of what you can do even during an epidemic. And I know we're all fatigued and sick of this way of meeting. But for all of the businesses that I advised, for my business, for this group, I've said consistently, if we focus on what we can do and not what we cannot do, we can accomplish amazing things. And so these are incredible examples of accomplishing incredible things for our community. So thank you for your continued engagement and work on the process at the subcommittee level. And I look forward to continuing to work with you into the next phase. Hazel, did you have any parting comments?
No, except I'd just like to thank all the subcommittees for the time and effort they put into their reports, and also the fact that they've meeting and been willing to continue to think about the home master plan during the fact that we're trying to deal with this epidemic. And I know that in the long run, that we'll find that this has made a huge difference to our community. So I just really want to thank everyone for the participation.
Well said. Thank you for that. Jim, any final comments?
Just one technical comment. So for those of you who are thinking you should edit or add to your template, please feel free to do that. VHB is welcoming you to add, modify, subtract, whatever you think is necessary on your template. There were comments and reactions this evening. I think comments are worthwhile to add as second thoughts. And for those groups that are still working on their templates, please feel free to finish them up and get them to VHB as quickly as you can. But we're still in the first phase, so don't feel that you've lost an opportunity. That's all I want to say. And thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Jim. And just a reminder that the document library now is becoming a repository for not only reference documents, and we will continue to add reference documents here. If you think there's anything that is missing or that we've overlooked, please provide that feedback. We will provide links to that. We will put the Affordable Housing Trust information here. And then the draft issues and opportunities templates are being published. We'll start publishing the draft baseline conditions paragraphs, as well as all of the Westborough TV recordings of all of our meetings and all of the background advisory presentations. And then the public meetings and everything else are all here under the document library. So please continue to use the website as a resource. And that is all I have. Thank you to Jeff at Westborough TV for carrying us through this live to the public. And we look forward to being in touch over the course of the next few weeks. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.